My name is Terrence Barkin. I'm the Executive Director of the Graphene Council, and we're hosting today's webinar series on graphene and energy storage devices, including batteries and supercapacitors and all those different chemistries that are working on in this sector. We're going to now hear from Dexter Johnson, our Senior Analyst in Madrid for the Graphene Council, who's going to give an overview. We've done a deep dive as an organization on graphene technologies over the past years. That's one of the reasons we've been hosting this series of presentations of the past 2 days. And Dexter is now going to share our perspectives, looking broadly at the graphene technologies, innovation landscape, and also the commercialization of these materials. So I think you'll find this quite interesting, and encourage you to listen to what Dexter has to say. So Dexter, my friend, it's all yours.
Okay, I just want to start off by saying it's been a privilege to be on the agenda with so many distinguished experts and pioneers in this area. So I just want to make that clear. So today I'm just going to, here's kind of the agenda. I'm going to provide some highlights of the battery market as it looks today, some of the market pulls, also some of the challenges. I'm going to look at how graphene is currently fitting into that landscape in terms of where the entry points may be. Look at the patent landscape for graphene and battery applications. We've looked at those numbers pretty carefully over the last 2 years. And while I did think of trying to do something broader in terms of all of the different chemistries, obviously we don't have the time to do that. So my focus will be on lithium ion chemistries in terms of graphene. And then finally kind of synthesize all that information to give an appraisal of where we may be with graphene in lithium ion battery applications. So the state of the battery market today, at least some of the highlights, if you will, or lowlights. Clearly demand is increasing. So the big driver will be electric vehicles, but also we can't overlook off-grid energy storage and personal electronics. But the key will be the EVs. This will by far represent the largest application demand for batteries. So if the entire demand for battery energy by 2030 is 2.6 terawatts, 2.3 terawatts will come from the EV mobility sector. So you can say virtually all of it. Here we go. Important thing to keep in mind is that battery demand is projected to outstrip graphite supply. So if you say that 1 gigawatt hour requires 400 metric tons of graphite, and global natural graphite production is currently around 750,000 metric tons a year. If you calculate in 2.6 terawatts of battery demand, it's expected by 2030 that you'll have a little over 1 million metric tons of graphite required per year. That's going to outstrip today's current supply of graphite by nearly 250,000 metric tons. So this is something that is going to become important. Another sort of grand picture issue with the battery market and what graphene producers and need to be aware of is how complex the ecosystem has come in just the last 5 years. You've had nearly $14 billion of investments and acquisitions. Companies like gas companies are buying battery manufacturers. Home appliance companies are buying startups. And Tesla has now producing a gigafactory with Panasonic. So this changes the whole dynamic of what had been a pretty staid marketplace for quite a while. And we sort of touched upon this with the recent Tesla Panasonic factory. A lot of the, in order to secure long-term deals with the car manufacturers, let's say, battery companies are boosting their capacity. This has gotten to be such a big deal that some battery manufacturers have actually just kind of left the marketplace. Bosch is a key example of that. So by 2040, the annual sales of will increase to 4 terawatt hours in the high, 2 terawatt hours in the moderate, and 0.6 terawatts in the low. So this corresponds to about 110, 55, and 15 operational gigafactories in each scenario. And if you assume that 35 gigawatt hours annual production for each gigafactory, so that gives you an idea of you're going to have an enormous overcapacity for what the demand will be. So while there is a strong demand and it is growing, the planned production looks kind of problematic. Another thing in terms of sort of grand view of the battery market is that lithium ion battery is not going to rule the roost forever. And it's currently in the dominant position and likely will remain there for quite some time. But the problem is that it's just bumping up against its theoretical limits at this point. It just can't get the watts per hour levels that are needed to get for EVs. So this is a real problem. Just the technology is kind of reaching its ceiling. Another issue, and I think we've touched upon this a little bit today, is that the battery industry is very conservative. This is due to the fact that there are long development cycles across the entire value chain. So we talked about 4 to 5 years, I think was one time period. And this is because of the long payback periods and the slow scale up for those interested in entering the market. So this makes the industry hesitant to take on new technologies or adopt new supply chains for established technologies. So if you're both a new technology and a new supply chain, then it takes a long time to break into the marketplace. Now, I'm just going to touch on some of the areas where lithium-ion batteries are playing a role, both in development and commercially. So this was discussed today of graphene-based anodes are reportedly capable of enabling lithium-ion batteries to achieve 80 kilowatt hours. So I think the number we saw today was 110. This number of 80 kilowatts is offered by another producer. We can't really say whether that is true or not, but this is, if we're in that range, then we're beginning to get into the area where graphene becomes a viable competitor to coated spherical graphite. So that's kind of a holy grail number of $80 per kilowatt hour. The way it's doing this is largely, has been discussed, is through enabling silicon anodes. So the most prominent example is the Panasonic 2170 cell that Tesla has used since 2015. But even that only represents about 1% of the anode materials produced globally. So while silicon does have advantages in its energy density capabilities, it does, through cycle life, it begins to deteriorate very quickly. It's still a fairly small segment of the lithium-ion battery anode market. And it's a small market, 1% currently. This could, of course, grow over time. But the development of silicon anodes for lithium-ion batteries has a lot of competition. There's a number of companies, Scylla Nanotechnologies, Enovix, Nanograph, Talga. These are all developed graphene-enabled solutions for silicon anodes, and it's created a kind of crowded number of companies with fairly advanced industrial solutions that just address this one issue, where currently only 1% of the market uses those kind of anodes. I want to talk about the patent landscape. This is something that we've been doing over the last couple of years, is looking at the number of patents and where they're all being focused upon. And back in the mid-2019 to mid-2020, energy storage was leading the way with 279. This is, and then in the next year, 2020, mid-2020 to mid-2021, energy storage again leads, but it's becoming even more dramatic. The focus on this is not just academic research. This is corporate research. So the exact breakdown are not provided in these numbers, but you can see that there's an interest at the very beginning of the development of commercial interest with the IP is that we're beginning to see more and more interest in energy storage. I just want to quickly run through some of the uses of graphene for lithium-ion batteries, first in the cathodes. So the existing studies show that graphene can't really be a direct substitute for carbon-based cathode materials because of its Coulombic efficiency and the high charge discharge and cycle stability. But when used in a matrix, the composite cathode materials can play a key role, and we've heard that discussed a couple of times today. While that's the case, there has been some preliminary research that's shown that graphene modified for use as cathode material can improve the electrochemical performance. And you get superior electron transfer, and you can improve the transmission and diffusion of electron and ions in the cathode materials. And continuing on with the cathodes, we see that graphene sheets have proven to be effective agents for improving the conductivity of LMO battery cathodes. And graphene can also be used to address the cation disorder that occurs in NMC battery cathodes during calcination deterioration. Finally, as far as the cathodes are concerned, adding graphene to the cathodes of the LFP batteries addresses their low electrical conductivity and poor lithium-ion diffusion. And these factors can lead to the capacity fade during charge and discharge. Now, in terms of the anodes, when graphene is combined with silicon and the anodes of lithium batteries, it can not only reduce the contraction of the silicon during the charge-discharge cycles, but also improve the electron and lithium capability. The performance of tin and its oxides anodes are improved when tin nanoparticles are embedded in graphene. And then copper oxide is another anode material in lithium-ion batteries that can be improved with the use of graphene or oxide graphene composites. And I'll just go on to the next table here. This is taken as kind of a accumulation of a lot of different lab reports. And let's see if I can reduce this somewhat. Yeah, so this table offers some interesting insights into the kind of trade-offs that occur with different battery chemistries. So you see silicon graphene, that obviously has the highest milliamperes per hour per gram at 2753, but it begins to fade dramatically down to 590 after just 50 cycles. If you look at the copper oxide, the graphene there that maintains the highest, if we look here, it maintains the highest capacity over numerous cycles. But if we go down to the here, right? Okay, let me just, yeah, down to the iron down here. This provides has 115 cycles and maintains nearly 1200 milliamperes per hour per gram. So there are different, you don't necessarily have to tie yourself to graphene, and silicon is the sort of message to be drawn here. The question got asked last week is, why hasn't graphene had a greater impact in lithium-ion batteries? And good question. Something I just touched on is battery manufacturers don't want to change battery chemistries. Even if lithium-ion batteries remain the commanding market leader for batteries, the manufacturers don't want to adopt a new material. And while they may be looking to improve their chemistries, they typically look to long-established supply partners. Also, it's the timing. Researchers have laid out kind of what they believe will be the time it will take to get graphene to make commercial headway into lithium-ion batteries. And by that time, we're going to begin to see alternative chemistries taking some market share from them. If we're talking 10, 15 years down the road, we may begin to see solid state batteries begin to take some market share. So I kind of dramatically say this could be trying to perfect what may become an obsolete technology. Continue on this. So the issue with silicon anodes, and this is where most of the commercial interest has been in using graphene for lithium-ion batteries. So one issue could be that other solutions are proving fairly effective in enabling silicon-based anodes. These can be sort of pre-lithiation methods, such as controlling the thickness of the lithium through evaporation, and that fairly simple to do and doesn't require use of another material. It's very difficult. Another issue is just the engineering gap between laboratory experiments that have very high energy densities and the manufacturing of these. It gets to be, it's been some years, so maybe it's more difficult than we really give it credit for. And maybe the benefits that are being given to the lithium-ion battery through graphene and silicon anodes, maybe it doesn't quite pay off. As mentioned today, maybe we have to, at that point, once you figure out the chemistry, does it really work out economically? And this is this is the real test. Is there a strong enough market pull to improve the lithium battery technology? I think it's just a matter of hedging more than anything. And so this is kind of my quick appraisal of graphene and lithium ion battery applications. So lithium ion batteries are going to continue to dominate the market for the next decade. So there needs to be focus on it, but just focusing on silicon anodes with graphene, it may be a bit of a challenge because there are a lot of competitors doing this at this point. It's fairly well financed and sort of a fair number of advanced solutions. One direction would be to look at different anode materials like copper and iron oxides. Well, they're not as cheap as silicon. They benefit from working a little bit better than silicon in the anodes of lithium ion batteries when they are combined with graphene. Another thing to keep an eye on is the emergence of the NMC batteries as the preferred lithium ion battery chemistry for EVs has to be taken into account. And so the ability of NMC graphene composites to combat disorder that occurs in the NMC battery cathodes during calcination, resulting in the deterioration of their connection. This has to be exploited. This is maybe one of the key entry points for graphene in lithium ion batteries. And with that, I'll turn it back to everybody that's on the call here. So I can.
Okay, we'll just do a stop share for a while. And then, yeah, if you go to the share screen and just do the stop share. Thank you. Excellent. Well, Dexter, I appreciate you kind of presenting a roundup on what we've been discussing with the development of energy storage technologies over the past couple of days and what we've seen over the past couple of months. And you can unmute yourself if you want for discussion. So one of the questions, and I think you've answered it already, was to say that will we ever get to a pure 100% graphene battery? And I think that is not what we've heard from any of the speakers. And I assume that's your position as well.
Absolutely no, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. So we've heard about a range of chemistries over the past 2 days, including lead batteries, as well as lithium ion and other technologies, aluminum. What impressed you the most, or what do you take away from the discussions that you've seen yesterday and today?
Well, I guess to just sort of continue on my presentation in how it ties into what everyone's saying is that I don't necessarily think that lithium ion batteries are going to be the way forward for graphene. I think the alternative chemistries that some of them were touched on today, like lithium metal, aluminum ion batteries, we have to look at solid state batteries, which may become the dominant battery chemistry into the future. Certainly there's a lot of money being invested in that space. I think there are opportunities for graphene there. I think one issue is that lithium ion battery marketplace is very well established. The supply chains are very well established. The battery manufacturers own that space, and it's very difficult for graphene producers to make their way into that supply chain. I think we saw evidence of how long it takes the graphene company to sort of go through this kind of testing process. I think that dynamic could change dramatically if, for instance, the battery manufacturers don't remain the gatekeepers of battery production. There's been increasing discussion of the role that the OEMs, namely the car manufacturers, are taking in this space. They actually may become the, if not the actual battery producers themselves, the ones who are making the demands of what they want the batteries to do. And when they can change that and they can go outside of the battery manufacturer supply chain, they may be able to go to graphene producers and say, you know, this is what we want to achieve. These are the numbers we need to have. You know, can you do it? That maybe shorten the cycle that it takes to bring a new material to market. So I think, but it's such a critical area of technological development and money and capital that we're going to see some transformational changes in the marketplace. And one of those may be the OEMs, the EV manufacturers, are going to take greater ownership of how batteries are produced, who they source materials from, and how all that works. And that may be an opportunity for graphene producers that have been kind of closed off for them for a number of years.
Well, that makes perfect sense. I agree with you 100%. I think, you know, we've had this conversation ourselves with automotive manufacturers going to 100% EVs. They absolutely must have control over the supply chain for the batteries in the automobiles, and we know from discussing with certain automobile companies that they intend to, you know, basically make their own batteries or have complete control over that supply chain. There was a question to the presentation that you had made regarding the volumes and assumptions made, in particular the number of EVs, and this is just passenger vehicles. I think the audience needs to also remember that you know, the energy storage technology going into transportation also applies to commercial vehicles, right? So this would be delivery vehicles, it would be trucks, but the EVs are what gets a lot of attention. And the assumptions that the Graphene Council has made before on demand, for example, an anode material, is based on approximately 90 million passenger vehicles production globally per year. That number has declined a bit with COVID, as has a lot of markets. But just for the sake of saying what we use for assumptions, we're looking at about a 90 million individual units, passenger vehicles produced per annum around the world. We're coming up to the end of our time. So Dexter, and we don't really have too many other questions here. There was one that was asking, you know, how graphite mining companies can help the development future of batteries. My first take on that one is graphite companies are going to see increased demand, even if it's simply for the traditional uses of graphite. And there's going to be a lot of competition over security of supply, I believe. The flip side is when we've looked at this graphite space, there are a lot of graphite assets, so basically proven reserves of graphite, which are also near surface mines, which means they're easier to access. And we assume that production is certainly going to come online as the price and demand for graphite increases. So there is going to be a tremendous amount of demand, but there are reserves, and I would say that they are relatively easy to tap into. Do you have any other comments or any closing remarks, Dexter?
No, I didn't get a good look at all of the questions that came in during my presentation, but no, I think what I would finally add is that there are opportunities and entry points for graphene. Those entry points and opportunities, the timescale may shorten if the market develops the way it appears to be. Everything is not necessarily tied to lithium-ion batteries. I think we've seen evidence of that through the last 2 days. The lead acid battery opportunity is very interesting. We've had a couple of presentations about that. Aluminum ion batteries, and today's presentation on both lithium ion and lithium metal, which are very interesting spaces to keep an eye on. I think, as I said, lithium ion is a dominant technology. It's going to be the dominant technology for years to come, but it is coming up against its limits. It just cannot provide the kind of performance that is really needed to make EVs the ubiquitous technology, or the ubiquitous way of getting people around that people expect it to be. So we're going to have to see some changes.
Well, I think that's a good way to end, because that's kind of the theme for graphene. What's gotten us to this point in terms of materials is not going to get us to where we need to go, and that's why we need advanced 2D materials. Graphene is in the forefront of that, and of course there are other 2D materials in the pipeline, like MaxScenes, TDMCs, HBN, et cetera, some of which have been referenced. On behalf of the Graphene Council, I want to thank all of our speakers for sharing their time and expertise, including you, Dexter. Thank you for your work on that. And we appreciate our audience and listening in. We always try to make our webinars technically informative and insightful, and we want to be your trusted source of information for all things graphene and other advanced 2D materials. So thank you, and we will get out slides and recordings to you sometime next week. Appreciate your participation.
Thank you, Terrence.